passing.
Do you want to tell me when? Good. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the May 19th regular meeting of the Transportation Commission. The Transportation Commission is conducting this meeting from the City Council chamber, and staff are complying with the current regulations of the California Department of Public Health and Cal OSHA for safe indoor meetings. As a courtesy and technology permitting, Members of the public may continue to provide live remote oral public comment via the city's Zoom video conferencing platform. However, the city cannot guarantee that the public's access to teleconferencing technology will be uninterrupted, and technical difficulties may occur from time to time. Members of the public desiring to provide public comments at the meeting are encouraged to attend the meeting in person. The meeting can be accessed by Zoom using meeting ID 882-8507-2649, and the passcode is 596015. If you wish to join by phone, dial 669-900-6833. Would the secretary please call the roll?
Sure. Commissioner German? Commissioner Reese?
Here.
Commissioner Salcido? Absent. Vice Chair Ash?
Here.
Chair Cagle?
Present. Okay. Thank you. This portion of the meeting is reserved for comment on items not on the agenda. Under the Brown Act, the Commission cannot act on items raised during public communications, but may respond briefly to statements made or questions posed, request clarification, or refer the item to staff. At this time, I will open this item up for public comment. Do we have any members of the public wishing to comment on items not on the agenda?
It does not appear that we have anybody from the public wanting to make any comment on anything not on the agenda in person or on Zoom.
Okay. Thank you. We'll move to the consent calendar. Approval of the meeting minutes of March 17th, 2022. At this time, I will open this item up for public comment. Do we have any members of the public wishing to comment on adoption of the meeting minutes?
We have no members of the public wanting to provide comments.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion for the approval of the minutes from the March 17th commission meeting?
So moved. Seconded.
Would the secretary please call roll?
Commissioner German?
Yay.
Commissioner Reese?
Yay.
Commissioner Salcido is absent. Commissioner Ash?
Yay.
Chair Cagle?
Aye. Thank you very much. That passes unanimously. So we'll move on to our next item for consideration. Sales tax measure. At this time, I invite City Manager Dan Buckshire to provide his presentation.
All right, good evening, everybody. Bear with me for just a moment while I pull this up here. There we go. All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Dan Buckshire, City Manager. I think I've met each of you, but if not, nice to meet you. And for those that I have, good to see you again. So I'm going to share what we have been working on at the city for the last couple of years, what our current focus is, and what we are thinking about for the future in terms of needs and wants of city residents and businesses. And something that's on the table to potentially fund some of that is a sales tax measure for the future. And the reason that I'm sharing this evening is so that all of you have the information. I'm reaching out to a lot of different organizations and individuals in the community, and as you as representatives of the city may receive questions about this, I want to make sure you're well informed about where the city is at. And then I also want to clarify something up front, and you'll likely receive more training on this within the next couple of months, is that in our roles as city staff, or in your case as city representatives, we cannot advocate for a tax measure while conducting city business. Obviously, in your personal lives, not in your commissioner roles, you have that opportunity to do so. So this evening, we can't have any discussions about in favor or against or anything that would lean to advocacy. This is simply an informational update for all of you. And at the end, I would certainly welcome any questions or clarification or any comments that any of you may have. So with that, Chair, if we're ready, I'll dive in here.
Please.
So I covered this already. So a quick overview of Walnut Creek, and this is likely a bit repetitive for all of you, but there might be a few tidbits. So we hit a major milestone with the completion of the 2020 census. We crossed 70,000 residents. We're roughly 71,000, and very soon we will have more demographic information from the Census Bureau. They're in the midst of releasing that right now. We're actually a bit bigger than what we may appear because one of the things that's unique about Walnut Creek is we do have pockets of unincorporated area, which basically fall under the county's jurisdiction. And many of these folks, these residences, have Walnut Creek mailing addresses. Looks and feels like Walnut Creek, but officially it's not Walnut Creek. There are about 20 to 25,000 residents. And realistically, they pretty much use city services, and for the most part, other than the roads and infrastructure, are maintained by the county. And if they call, for police response that's not 911, non-emergency, the sheriff would show up instead of our police. But otherwise, they're basically Walnut Creek residents. So it's a long way of saying we're closer to 90 to 95,000. And then depending upon what's occurring, given that we are a regional destination and hub for jobs and entertainment, our population swells upwards of about 200,000 at any given time. Certainly pre-COVID, it's probably less than that currently. And then realistic, one of the things that I hear on a regular basis from folks is one of the things that sets Walnut Creek apart is that we do have a high quality of life here that our residents have come to enjoy and in many cases have come to expect, and I'll speak about that in a little bit more detail. We do provide all the fundamental services that most cities do in terms of we have our own police department, obviously we have our patrols and response, but beyond that, we do a lot of emergency preparedness and training, particularly for fire, given the fire danger in California. We do not provide fire department services. That's provided by the county, but we do partner with them and work with them closely for preparation and response. In fact, just this past weekend, we held an evacuation drill in Rossmore and had about 125 residents evacuate, and we led that effort partnering with fire and police and Red Cross and several other agencies, just to give you a flavor of some of the things we do. Obviously, we maintain streets and roads, infrastructure, storm drains, that sort of thing. And then again, I think one of the things that sets Walnut Creek apart a bit are the number of our parks, the nice condition that our parks are generally in. We have a large amount of open space for a city our size. Actually, on a per capita basis, I think we have the second highest amount of open space in the state. And then we are known for our arts and recreational opportunities. Here, the Leisure Center is owned and operated by the city. The Repertory Theater is owned and operated by the city. And obviously, we have many, many other programs that contribute to the quality of life. So I'm going to shift gears here now and talk about the last couple of years in that we have been dealing with 3 emergencies over the last 2 years. Obviously, one being COVID, the other being primarily during the summer of 2020, which was social justice, social unrest matters, and then lastly, the economic and budgetary impacts that were associated with the impacts of COVID. So much like many other organizations, we had to change the way we worked, other than our absolutely critical resources and services that need to be in person, such as police and our public works employees that maintain our roads, our streets. Everybody else was required to work from home, and that lasted for about 15 months, so we transitioned all of our other services online. That's not something we did a lot of previously. It's a tremendous amount of work to do all of that, and I'm really proud of the efforts of all of our employees in doing that. It generally worked pretty well, not to say there weren't some problems, because there were. And right now, we're spending some time reflecting upon how we did that transition to determine what we can learn and apply and improve going forward. But what became obvious is our customers like that approach. So prior to COVID, we used to have about 50 visitors a day to City Hall, largely in development services coming in for permits or plan review. We're now at about 10 to 15 a day in person. And it's not that the volume of services dropped, it's that folks continue to seek those services online. So we're really rethinking how can we best serve the community, best serve our customers in ways they want to be served. And, we try to not take it personally that folks don't want to come see us at City Hall, but realistically, if you don't have to go to the DMV or City Hall and you can do that online, why wouldn't you? So we want to try to support that flexibility for folks who want to be here in person, but who would also may want to be receiving services online. Welcome, Commissioner. And then lastly, and we did a lot of things related to COVID. We dealt with all the regulations and health orders, communicating those, enforcing those, but probably the most visible change was the outdoor dining. That needed to be done in order to help keep our restaurants in business, given that many of them could not serve indoors for a long time, had limited capacity beyond that. And while it might seem kind of straightforward just to, put some tables and chairs out in the street, there's a lot more to it than that, ensuring that they were done safely, meet health code requirements, not only for COVID, but for food service standards, ensuring that there was equity amongst how where the tables and chairs were placed so as not to impede other businesses, and there were fire code issues. Anyway, we've continued to work through that, and one of the possible silver linings of COVID is that we're going to have more outdoor dining for the future. People really like it. We've heard that they want to keep it. And so we're transitioning from a temporary approach to a permanent, which we're calling Downtown Next. And so over the course of the next year, you'll see many of these temporary structures that candidly are looking a little worn in many cases, replaced with structures that are designed to be safer for everybody, for vehicles and obviously for individuals dining, and will look much better as well. So that is something that is here to stay. The second major emergency we were dealing with was the summer of 2020. Obviously, it was a very challenging summer for the country after the murder of George Floyd. There's a considerable amount of protests, social justice movements, some social unrest, and Walnut Creek was, in the eye of the storm in that. There were some major events that occurred early on May 31st, actually, of 2020. There was a major looting event at Broadway Plaza. There were about 40 stores that were targeted, were broken into, about $4 to $5 million of stolen goods, several $100,000 of damage to stores. And as you can see in the picture there, a lot of boarded up windows, not only in response to having that happen, but others that were doing it preemptively to avoid something else. The very next day, on June 1st, was the largest of what became a very regular event in terms of protests. There were about 5,000 to 7,000 people that started in Civic Park and then marched throughout the streets. Generally speaking, it was peaceful. Sadly, there was some interaction with the police at the freeway at 680. Fortunately, there weren't any major injuries or anything worse than that, but it was challenging. And we heard from the community that there were folks who felt we didn't respond strongly enough to the looting event, and that we responded too strongly to the protests. So we really refined our approach to that and the way we responded, as there were multiple protests every week throughout all of 2020 and into 2021. With the goal of keeping everybody safe, the protesters, residents, visitors, protecting property as well, and also obviously supporting everybody's right to protest and their First Amendment rights. So we did adjust that process. Generally, things went more smoothly after that, and I think more importantly, we listened to what was being said. Not only then, but earlier in 2019, there was a controversial officer-involved shooting in Walnut Creek. We worked with the family members, with their supporters, to really revisit our approach to public safety, to expand the definition beyond traditional law enforcement, looking at mental health crisis response. Was the big piece, focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. And we've made a lot of progress. We've partnered with the county, with our 18 neighboring cities, to create a new expansive program in which mental health clinicians and experts would respond to someone who's in a mental health crisis, as opposed to or in addition to law enforcement, depending upon the severity of the situation. Give you a sense of scale, the program would increase the number of crisis response teams from the current number of 2 to 34 when we're at full scale. And that program is the A3 program, which means that anyone, anywhere, anytime in the county can receive service within 15 minutes. We are in the midst of kicking off additional DEI training for all of our city staff. That's already occurred for our police department, and our police officers have also received additional training as it relates to mental health crises. So a lot of work on that front. Things started to improve in 2021, and then we had a different type of event, but another type of emergency nonetheless, was when right around the Saturday before Thanksgiving, there was a large-scale organized retail theft event at Nordstrom in Broadway Plaza, in which about 80 individuals and 20 to 25 vehicles arrived at about 8:45 on a Saturday night. The whole event lasted 4 minutes. They went into the Nordstrom store, made out with about $100,000 of merchandise. There were 3 employees that were assaulted who were injured. were in their vehicles and then left. Then were in the store for 1 minute. The whole event lasted 4 minutes. We did make 3 arrests that evening and have made a few subsequent to that, but it was challenging. It happened very quickly. It was difficult to get folks on scene. It was very well coordinated. And then in the era of COVID, it's not unusual for folks to wear masks, so it's been really difficult to identify folks after the fact in order to try to make arrests. So we heard from the community there was a lot of concern about folks feeling for their safety, and the businesses were concerned. This was the start of the unofficial shopping season, in which many of the retailers generate about half of their revenues during the holiday season. So a lot of concern on that front. The mayor and city council took swift action and held a special meeting about a week later, invited others who are involved in the criminal justice system, being the district attorney and sheriff's department, to talk about their roles in trying to prevent this from occurring and obviously pursuing charges for those that were arrested. In addition to that, the city council authorized funds for additional overtime that went into effect immediately. It was mandatory, so we had additional officers on the street. Also authorized the addition of an additional police beat with 5 new officers. Those are in the midst of being hired. And then authorized funds to purchase and install additional security cameras and a drone that would help monitor that type of event and may help with identifying folks after the fact. So those were really the first a couple of emergencies. The other is more fiscal and economic that I'll speak to in a few moments. But I am pleased to state that where we are today, things are much better. The economy has rebounded, I think, much more quickly than folks thought. I don't know that anybody imagined we'd be in one of the worst labor shortages in probably close to 50 years, on the heels of, while we're actually still dealing with COVID. Downtown is much more active, and sadly, there were a number of businesses that did go under during COVID, but we are seeing a lot of new businesses coming in, which is encouraging to see. So our vacancy rate is actually back down to pre-COVID levels, certainly in the downtown area and in our other shopping centers. As I mentioned, we are, really trying to move out of emergency management mode and a reactionary mode to being present focused and then planning for the future. And our current focus is always on our council priorities. These are set every 2 years by council. These particular set were put in place in March of 2021, so they have about a year left before we will revisit them. They are all of equal weighting. They happen to be in alphabetical order is the structure here, but DEI, I mentioned some of those activities earlier. Economic development, given that we are a regional hub and a focus for the East Bay to ensure that our businesses remain strong. Walnut Creek has long been a leader in environmental sustainability, and we intend to be so going forward. So something that flew under the radar that was actually a really big milestone is we achieved our greenhouse gas reduction targets for our current climate action plan in 2020, and actually ahead of schedule, which is something that would have been heavily celebrated had we not been in the midst of the pandemic. So what we're looking at now is creating our plan for the next decade of how are we going to achieve the additional targets that have been set by the state and that we will adopt here locally. So much more to come on this in the coming months. We are looking to have an update to the City Council in August, and then probably a few months thereafter, hopefully adopt an updated plan. Infrastructure and facility has been a priority since 2017, and I'll speak to this in more detail. It takes a while to really upgrade and build new infrastructure because of the funding that's involved, as well as the effort to actually pull it together. And then I spoke to some of the changes in both social wellness and public safety earlier. So let me shift gears to what was the third of the 3 emergencies, which were the budgetary and economic impacts. So the bright side is that the city has a long history of being fiscally responsible, and we started from a strong foundation. So when we were hit rather hard with significant revenue drops, we were much better positioned than maybe others were, which helped us get through this. That said, it was still a very difficult time. So you're not going to hear me talk about how horrible the city finances are. What you're going to hear me talk about is that we're in sound shape generally for what we have, but there are a lot of needs on the horizon that would be difficult to meet without additional revenue sources. Let me give you a little context. We have about $125 million operating budget. $90 million of that is the general fund, and that is defined just as it sounds. We can generally spend that on anything the city does. The other $35 million is restricted in use and can only be used for specific purposes. Probably the best example that I could give is the city owns and operates the Boundary Oak Golf Course. So anybody who golfs there and pays a greens fees, that money has to be spent on the golf course. We cannot use it to invest in our roads or in the leisure center or anything else. It has to be reinvested and spent on those activities. So we have about $35 million that are restricted for various purposes. And then obviously you can see on the capital side, that varies dramatically depending upon if we have a large project in the works or not. But on average, about 10% of the budget is spent on capital overall. So what did COVID mean? It was significant. So keep those numbers in mind, particularly the general fund, because most of the revenue losses in the general fund of $90 million, we were looking at potentially a $25 million revenue loss in 15 months, which is huge on a percentage basis. And what actually happened was a little less than that. We were fortunate, and I think it's kind of odd to say that we were pleased that we only had a $15 million revenue loss over a little more than a year as opposed to 25. That gives you a sense of the magnitude of the issue. And the real challenge was that in the first 3 months of the pandemic, so March through the end of June of 2020, which happened to be the last quarter of our fiscal year, we lost $7.5 million of that revenue during that 3-month time frame. So it was time to pull the fire alarm in terms of how are we going to deal with, because nobody knew how long COVID was going to last and what the impacts would be at that point. So it was an extremely unpopular and unpleasant time to be on the city council, to be involved in these decisions. A lot of difficult decisions had to be made. Numerous expenditure reductions. We dialed back. On the administrative side, we unfortunately had to scale back staff, reduce programs and services, look for every cent that we could. Excuse me. We had planned to use some of our rainy day funds. Unfortunately, we did not end up needing to. When the revenues came in a little bit better, we backed off of that. And then the federal stimulus funds made a big difference. It was $4 million that we applied from the federal government that had they not been received, we either would have had to dip into the bank account or make additional cuts, which would have been painful at that point because the ones that were already made were difficult. So that was the impact. As I mentioned, we're in a pretty good position now because those difficult decisions were made. And where we stand overall is that, we are in sound shape. You can see here we have very little debt, no general fund debt. The only debt we have is for the solar panels that are in the parking lot of the Boundary Oak Golf Course, and it's not very much. The state auditor reviews the fiscal condition of all 482 cities. It's either annually or every other year. I should know that by now, but I think it's annually. We are considered to be in a good category. There is a higher level that we're aspiring to, but overall we're sound. We do have ample funds in the bank. Thanks, Matt. To meet any unexpected challenges. And then we're well aware of the pension liabilities that exist. We are part of the PERS retirement program. Costs are increasing. We have set money aside. So as you can see on the top of the slide there, I think a way to summarize is we are fiscally healthy, but not wealthy. And as we look toward some of the needs going forward, it will be a challenge to meet those. So let me speak to those in a bit. We have been doing a lot of outreach over the last several months. I've been meeting with groups. City council members have been meeting with individuals and groups. We actually did a statistically valid poll in January to hear what's on folks' minds. We have a survey. Hopefully all of you received that, either the hard copy in the letter from me or online. We've received a few thousand responses. And here's what we're hearing thus far of what people are thinking is important for Walnut Creek. Not surprisingly, the events of the last few years, public safety rates very high. Obviously, police patrols and crime prevention, but also focusing on neighborhood crime and prevention. Certainly emergency response, disaster preparedness. I mentioned wildfire response and preparedness early. And then thinking more broadly, and all of you on your roles in the Transportation Commission are aware of this, is more broadly looking at public safety and thinking about our infrastructure and our roadways and our walkways, as we would like to see folks getting out of their vehicles and either biking or walking. How do we ensure that that intersection between vehicles and individuals is safe, and that we can promote safe routes to school, safe routes to work, wherever the case may be, that we have public safety as top of mind. Homelessness is something that's on folks' mind, and sadly, one of the impacts of COVID is that homelessness has increased. We knew that anecdotally, and the numbers are just now coming out from a recent count that was done by the counties. We are heavily involved in homeless activities. We partner with many other organizations, most notably the Trinity Center. They provide the day center where folks can go to get a meal, take a shower, just get off the street for a while during the day. And then we also partner with Trinity for the winter overnight shelter that is in the Armory in Civic Park, where folks, again, can get out of the elements during the evening, during the winter months when it may be cold or rainy. We also partner with the county to fund 2 social workers who are dedicated full-time in Walnut Creek to make contact with homeless individuals, to form a relationship. As you can imagine, some of the chronically homeless are resistant to government services, to really try to build that rapport, one, to help them out in the interim, but with the ultimate goal of getting them off the street and into housing, and preferably to be self-supportive and get back on their feet ultimately. That is the goal. So we partner with the county with that, and then we also have a dedicated team of police officers, 2 officers that make up what's called our HOP team, our homeless outreach program. And they partner closely with the social workers, again, to try to make contact, to try to help the homeless, and they're also there to enforce the law if it's being broken as well. So they have a dual role. They partner closely with the social workers as well as with those folks that work at the Trinity Day Center to have an integrated approach to homeless. But it continues to remain a challenge. Ongoing programs and services, particularly for seniors and youth, are something that we're hearing about. We do have, we're older than average in Walnut Creek. We have Rossmore, which is an over 55 community, and 1 out of every 7 residents lives in Rossmore and Walnut Creek. But even if we adjust for that, we are older than average, so we have a lot of senior programs that we support for programming. Certainly in the community center at Civic Park, but many of our other facilities support senior programs. And then we partner with several of our schools, and the after-school programs that are actually run by the city in a partnership with the schools. We do have 2 libraries that is a bit unusual. We're one of the only cities in Contra Costa County that has 2 libraries, which are very, very heavily used. We have one of the highest circulation rates per capita of any of the cities in the Bay Area. Again, not surprising given what we've all gone through the last couple of years, that COVID response, ensuring that we move forward safely, and in doing so can help our businesses recover, recognizing that we are a job center and an entertainment hub. And then lastly, I referred to this earlier, but infrastructure and facilities are rating very high. You know, the good news from an infrastructure standpoint is that most of our infrastructure can be maintained and is generally in pretty good shape. But we do have a handful of facilities that are nearing the end of their useful lives. And most notably is the swim center out at Heather Farm, both the pool, the bathhouse, and then the community center that's nearby. They're actually all turning 50 this year, and effectively they've been loved to death, and they're worn out. And the pool breaks down regularly. We spend a lot of money maintaining it, and it's only a matter of time before it becomes completely unusable. To give you a sense of scale of why we're looking at potentially additional funding measures, not only for this facility, but other facilities and other programs and services. This one alone to replace the pool, the bathhouse, and the community center is somewhere between $50 to $60 million. So it's sizable. We do not have that type of money in the bank to pay for that. So what we are contemplating is pursuing a half-cent sales tax. And something that's important to note is that in California, per state law, local governments cannot impose a tax on any residents or on anyone for that matter. The only thing we can do is ask the voters if they would like to tax themselves. And that's what's being contemplated, is putting a measure on the ballot for the fall of 2022. And ultimately, the City Council will have to make that decision by early August. So between now and then, we are out talking with folks, soliciting feedback in order to determine whether or not to proceed, and if so, how. So let me give you a little more context on the sales tax, potential sales tax, and then I'll wrap things up here. So the sales tax rate in Walnut Creek is 8.75%, which is the lowest in the region. That is the regional minimum. Of that 8.75%, the city receives 1%. The rest either goes to the state or to other regional entities, such as the county or to BART as well. And one of the things we contemplate is if we were to increase the sales tax rate, might folks shop in other cities in order not to pay that additional tax? Seems unlikely after looking at it, because even if we were to increase the rate by a half cent, we would be on par with Pleasant Hill and then we would still be below some of our other neighboring cities, being Concord, Martinez, and Orinda. We would still be lower, and we would still be one of the lowest in the general region. So we think it's unlikely that folks would shop elsewhere because there's really nowhere else to go where it would be less. Considering a 10-year sunset, the thought process behind that is we could accomplish a lot in a decade. And if we do and accomplish everything and there are no additional needs, it would sunset. And if we determine that there's more to be done, we might go back out and ask the voters for an extension at that point in time. But that's a decision for a decade from now. Roughly, it would generate about $11 to $13 million a year. It's a little hard to estimate right now because spending patterns are still sporadic in terms of the impact of COVID. We saw a big shift away from services, entertainment, dining out during COVID. People were purchasing things, primarily vehicles. And now we're seeing that shift back to services again, but in different ways. And there's a lot more online shopping than there was as well, which impacts things. But safely speaking, we think we're in the 11 to 13 million range. The average cost to a family is about $10 a month, just to give you a sense of scale. And then one of the big considerations was, what type of tax? Obviously, there are others beyond a sales tax, most notably a parcel tax that businesses that residents would pay, property owners would pay. But the thought is that the sales tax revenue that's generated, half of it is generated by folks who do not live in Walnut Creek. And the reality is folks who don't live in Walnut Creek who visit here impact our facilities and our services. They're driving on the roads, hiking in the open space, utilizing our facilities, generating the need to add additional police officers in some cases. And as such, we think it's more equitable that those that are benefiting from the services share in some of the cost. So as I mentioned, no decisions have been made. This is intended to be informative only. If you have not filled out your survey already, I'd encourage you to do so. We have until the end of the month. You can either do it in hard copy or you can do it online at our website that you can see the address here. And with that, Chair, I'd be happy to entertain any questions or comments that anybody may have.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Are there any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Reese?
Is there a place online where you can see approximately how the funds would be used over the 10 years?
Currently, not at this point. That's something that would be developed over time. Right now, we're soliciting input from folks for what's important, and this is what we're hearing so far. We're obviously soliciting feedback through the online poll and through the mailer and seeing what that states to best figure out how the money should be spent.
Commissioner German?
Thank you. Would there need to be private financing for any of these projects? I'll say it. Would there need to be private financing for any of these infrastructure projects?
Would there be financing needed for any of the infrastructure? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, most likely. So one of the things that would be considered if, whether it's the swim center or whatever other infrastructure might be funded, if you look at the revenue stream, if a project costs, say, $50 million, you'd have to save up for 5 or 6 years. And folks, if they pass a tax measure, would usually want to see something sooner, because if you're waiting 5, 6 years, it takes a few years to build, you're 7, 8 years out. So what we would likely look to do is issue some short-term debt that would be tied to the range of the sales tax duration, so probably a 10-year note of some sort, use the sales tax funds to help pay for that so that we could get working on any of the infrastructure upgrades sooner than later.
So in the case of the center, who is the private financer for that?
Who is the what?
Private finance.
Who would private finance it?
There are various institutions that could do that, whether it be a bank or other lenders. There are a number of organizations that do that. In fact, there are affiliations through the League of California Cities and otherwise joint powers authorities that we can use that are public entities that support this exact sort of activity.
So if the private entity didn't come up with the funds, what would happen to the city's money?
I didn't quite catch all that. I apologize.
I'm sorry. If the private financer did not come up with the funds, what would happen with the city's money?
So I think there's two pieces. So if I'm understanding correctly, if the sales tax didn't pass, what would happen with the facilities?
If the private financer did not come up their share of the funds.
Oh, if the private didn't come up with their funds. So there's a couple things here. One, I should clarify, as far as pursuing a new pool, the Aquatics Foundation, we entered into an MOU with them that they're going to fundraise for $3 million to help contribute to the cost of a pool, and there's some backstops in place in the arrangement on that to help ensure that that would occur. But as far as the private funding through a loan, I think that would be secured. So I'm not too concerned about that. That those funds should be available, especially given our fiscal condition. I think we would receive a reasonable rate as well.
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? Vice Chair Ash?
So first off, you started what, about a year before COVID?
About two, but yeah, half
Two,
pre-COVID, half.
So it's been a fun adventure with everything that you listed in our terms of crisis. So I just want to say thank you for really stepping up and helping guide the city through everything. As residents, I know we appreciate it. And I bet you a lot of people just complain and don't say thank you. So thank you.
Appreciate that.
Just a couple of questions, which is probably more for my information, but things that you talked about. That unincorporated part of Walnut Creek, you said they use our services, probably a lot of the parks and rec programs, streets for sure. Have we ever looked at annexing that? Is there a history there? I'm not advocating one way or another. I'm just trying to understand, is that even an option? Has that ever been done or not?
Yeah, I'm just chuckling a bit because I asked the exact same question when I started here. And if you look at the city map, it's one of the first things you're like, why is this like this? There have been discussions over the years. There have been some efforts that were not successful. There are some areas of the city that have, in those unincorporated areas, that have no interest in joining the city for various reasons. And then annexations can be challenging from a negotiation standpoint to ensure that there's fiscal parity. And so as the responsibility in theory would shift from the county to the city, you want to ensure that one entity doesn't benefit at the expense of the other, meaning that if we were to inherit the infrastructure that may not be in such dire shape that it would put an undue burden on the rest of the city. At the same time, excuse me, want to make sure that from the county's perspective, that if the annexation occurred, that the tax revenues that would be generated primarily through property tax in that case wouldn't far outpace the cost to maintain the infrastructure. So there's negotiations that occur there. That can all be worked out. It takes a while. But it really comes down to the interest of the individuals. There was a certain pocket of the unincorporated area that did approach us. In hindsight, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 months before COVID about possibly annexing, and then haven't heard anything since for obvious reasons.
Okay, great. And then on the rebound plan and I guess was the next phase of it, how are the street closures impacting? What's the impact? How many parking spaces do we know have been tied up? And maybe this is follow-up information that can come later. That's okay. Lack of parking meters. What's the impact on the budget that we've approved for things like the trolley, et cetera, that are service plans from that?
Yeah, I'll see if I can get this from memory, and I might need a little help from Smadar. We can follow up later. But I think there are about 150 parking spaces that have been impacted overall, give or take. To date, as part of the Economic Development Initiative, the city has absorbed the cost of the lost revenue from that. But going forward on a permanent basis, as we transition from temporary to permanent structures, any business that would like to utilize those spaces will have to pay a fee in order to do so, in order to offset those costs. To date, just as a round figure, it varies a bit, but each metered space generates about $7,000 of revenue a year.
So break even roughly on the cost, but what is the impact on the parking? We're supposed to have like an 85% is our goal on this commission of usage. So you're talking 180 spaces, I think you just said. Are there any updated? And again, I know you don't have this data in front of you, but if there's updated data, love to see that.
Yeah, that's certainly something we can provide. What I'll say generally is parking had been very sporadic for the first, I want to say roughly 6-8 months, maybe a little bit longer in COVID, we stopped charging anything at any of the meters. As all of you know, that charging is done in order to manage demand, and there was no demand at that point in time. So as it started to pick up, we did start to charge. There are some pockets where we're at that 85%, but others where we're still lighter than that. But we could certainly provide that information in more detail at a follow-up.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions of the commissioners? Okay, I have none. So we will take it to if there are any members of the public that are wishing to provide public comment.
It doesn't appear that there are any members of the public who wish to provide comment.
Okay, great. So at this time, are there any commissioners with comments? Sounds like none. Thank you very much, City Manager Buckshire, for being here with us this evening. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your time this evening. And if you do have any other follow-up questions, feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item B, County Connection presentation. At this time, I invite County Connection staff to please provide your presentation. Welcome.
Great. Good evening. I'm Melody Reeves. I am the Director of Planning and Marketing with County Connection. Thanks for having me tonight, and I'm just giving a brief update on our transit service in the city. And so just some quick background on us. We were formed through a joint exercise of powers agreement in 1980. We serve the 10 cities and unincorporated areas within central Contra Costa County. We provide a variety of different services, including traditional fixed route services, both weekday and weekend service, as well as our 600 series routes, which are scheduled to meet school bell times, as well as some express services, which provide some limited stop service during peak commute hours. We also provide linked paratransit service, as well as some special shuttle services in partnership with the county and other universities and BART to provide services for specific needs. Our annual budget is around $45 million, and our annual ridership, at least pre-COVID, was around 3.5 million. And so a bit about the service we provide in the city. We have a few local routes which connect to BART and local destinations within the city, as well as to neighboring jurisdictions. We have a number of free routes where we have subsidized fares. And so those include our partnership with the City of Walnut Creek, which subsidizes fares on Route 4, also known as the Downtown Trolley, and Route 5. There's also Route 7, which is subsidized by the Shadelands Business District. And then we also have Route 14, and fares on that route are funded by a cap and trade grant program, LC-TOP. We also have a number of express routes providing commute services down to Bishop Ranch, San Ramon. And then weekend routes, including Route 4, as well as 3 other local routes. Just a note that Route 311 will hopefully also be free starting July 1st, pending our LC-TOP grant award, hopefully extending that program. And then we have 3 school routes that serve WCI, and then finally a special service, our Alamo Creek Shuttle, which provides some service between East Danville and the BART station. And so, overview of ridership trends since COVID. And so here, this chart shows ridership on all of our routes that serve Walnut Creek starting in January of 2020. And so as you can see, the pandemic had a significant impact on our ridership. And I will note that the trends you see here are pretty reflective and mirror our system-wide trends. We saw a pretty immediate drop, about 70%, immediately following the shelter-in-place orders. And over time, we've seen that slowly ebb and flow, kind of in relation to the number of cases. More recently, we have seen a bit more of an uptick, especially in we resumed our school services, and so that has seen a significant return of ridership, as well as some of our express routes. We are currently about 50% of our pre-pandemic ridership, and I would say that especially the local and free routes are where we've seen kind of ridership continue to grow. And so a bit more about our subsidized fare agreements for the routes in Walnut Creek. As I mentioned, the city subsidizes fares on Route 4 and Route 5. Ridership on those routes, we've seen ridership on Route 4 recovering faster, and I think this is largely driven by businesses reopening. Routes 5 and 7, which are a little bit more commuter-focused, those have been much slower to recover, and that's kind of also reflected in the rest of our services, such as our express routes. And then in terms of the agreements, in recognition of the impacts of the pandemic on ridership, as well as, I think as mentioned before, the city's parking revenues, our agreement with the city for those two routes was amended at the end of 2020 to reduce those subsidy amounts. And then in terms of service levels, we did make temporary service cuts at the start of the pandemic. We cut our services by about 20%. A big portion of that was our school services, which were temporarily discontinued as schools went to virtual instruction. We also reduced frequency on our low ridership routes, and really we're focusing on retaining our essential service as well as service coverage. And so this meant a lot of our express and commuter-focused routes we cut frequency on, and those were the ones that were really sustaining the largest ridership losses. Our board did approve a continuation of reduced service levels of about 13% last March, and then this past fall, we did restore some service, including our school routes, as schools returned to in-person instruction, as well as additional service on our express routes. But ultimately, right now, our ability to restore additional service is really limited by our operator shortage, and that is something that's affecting, I think, most transit agencies nationwide. And so finally, kind of a bit of what's ahead for us. We have resumed our operator recruitment last July. Unfortunately, hiring has not quite kept pace with attrition, but we are still pushing forward and trying to come up with innovative ways to recruit operators. Another thing that we are embarking on this summer and fall is an update to our short-range transit plan. This is our operations and financial planning document. It's required by MTC every 4 years. And this one will be interesting because the guidelines have been updated in recognition of the impacts of the pandemic and a lot of the uncertainty around revenues and ridership, to include scenario planning. So looking at different scenarios with different assumptions about how ridership and revenues will return or not return. That effort will include public outreach. We are planning to conduct some community and passenger surveys to get a better sense of what people's transportation needs are coming out of the pandemic. and then also kind of a more formal public hearing process for that. And then I also wanted to mention we have several fair programs and promotions that are planned or currently underway, really kind of targeting, I think, two of our rider demographics where we've seen either continued or increased demand. And so that includes students, as I mentioned, who have returned to transit, I think, at a faster rate. And so we have our Summer Youth Pass program and our Pass to Class program in partnership with 501 Contra Costa that provides either discounted or free rides during the summer as well as the start of the new school year. And then we have our Clipper Youth Fare discounts that provide a 20% discount off of the adult fare for youth. And then kind of the other set of programs is really for low-income riders. And so we have our Clipper Start program, which also provides a discount, and that is a region-wide program, as well as our Monument Free program. And so that includes the free rides on Route 14, as well as hopefully Route 311. And so with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Melody, for the presentation. Are there any questions from the commissioners? Vice Chair Ash?
Hey, thanks for being here. I was just wondering on the hiring of the operators, do you guys outsource like the drivers to any of those companies? I know a couple of the agencies do, or do you have them in-house?
Yeah, so our, at least for our fixed route services, our drivers are in-house. Yeah, so we contract out our paratransit operations, but we directly hire our drivers.
Okay. And then two parts to the same question is, what are your biggest challenges in the next year, 2-3 years? One, addressing riders coming back post-COVID world, but then just in general as an agency, what are the biggest challenges you guys?
I mean, I would say that, the operator shortage is a big one. We don't know how long that's going to last. And I think that, unfortunately, it limits our ability to put out service. And in turn, that results in reduced frequency, and then, that discourages ridership. So I think that's really going to be our biggest challenge in the next year or so, is making sure that we're able to retain our operators and retain our service.
And then what are you doing to get the ridership back to, or how are you and other transit agencies working generally to get riders back post-COVID world? I know you talked about the schools, I guess, in the other realms.
Yeah, I think that part of our planning over the next year or so, especially with the short-range transit plan, we'll be looking at how travel patterns have changed. I think one of the big things we've seen is a shift away from commute ridership. And so how do we change or shift or better deploy our services to better meet what the community now needs in terms of transportation? So I think that will be one of the big pieces in terms of better understanding what people's travel needs are and being able to meet them in order to increase ridership.
All right, Commissioner Salcido.
Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if you have any insights on the ridership pre and post pandemic in terms of any differences that you're seeing in terms of the makeup of the demographics or specific zip codes or locations where you're seeing the biggest losses in terms of ridership?
Yeah, so we don't currently have demographic information. That is something we're hoping to collect in our upcoming survey efforts. But I would say that one thing that, in addition to kind of the shifts in, I would say, time of day of travel, one interesting thing we saw was that weekend ridership recovered much faster than weekday ridership. And that, I think, was a lot of people who still had to, make those trips. to jobs who worked on weekends. Another thing that we saw was the trip lengths overall got a lot shorter, and I think that also pointed to fewer people using it for longer commutes and using it more for local trips.
Have there been any discussions about re-implementing some sort of a mask mandate or requirement on County Connection? Because I believe currently BART is the only transit agency in the Bay Area that has that requirement since the CDC removed that from their regulations.
I don't believe so, not for our agency specifically.
Okay, because I wonder if seniors, since you don't have demographic information, I suppose it's difficult to say one way or another, but I wonder if seniors and other high-risk folks are resorting to other modes of transportation just because of the potential risk with the pandemic, since we're still in the pandemic. And then one additional question, I mean, it's always concerning with reduced service that could lead to reduced usage just because of the reliability and convenience aspect of it. And so I don't know, I see that your title includes innovation, and so I'm wondering if you have any plans or initiatives to think about smaller vehicles at more frequent intervals, autonomous vehicles, things like that, for the future to make it a more convenient option for people instead of kind of moving to reduced service, which makes it that much more of an obstacle for people to use.
Yeah, so we have done a couple pilot programs looking at other mobility service providers. So, for example, we have a program in San Ramon where we have partnered with Lyft and Uber to provide subsidized rideshare trips for people within areas where there isn't fixed route service. So that's something we've definitely been exploring. I will say that generally, vehicle size doesn't necessarily impact the cost of operations significantly. And so it's really, I would say, it's really just the operators. It's really being able to get operators.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, I just was thinking that as we think about ridership moving forward, I mean, it sounds like you're doing some surveys of your ridership and potential ridership, and what are you experiencing so far, maybe in some of the responses about ridership coming back? If there are more folks that might be working from home on a regular basis and not necessarily utilizing it moving forward, I'm just kind of curious what the pulse is of what you're getting, and any research that you do, I'm sure that we would appreciate it if you share it with us moving forward, if that's a possibility as well.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, sorry. So we don't have a sense quite yet, but it's definitely something that we could come back and share.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, if there are no other questions, we'll open it up to public comment. Are there any members of the public wishing to provide comment on this?
There are no members of the public who wish to provide comment.
Great, thank you. And so we'll seek comments from commissioners at this point. Any comments from commissioners before we let our guest go?
I just like to give compliments, I guess, tonight. So I just want to compliment. I've taken that Shadelands-free shuttle before. I live in the residential neighborhood there, but it provides a good service, and I know a lot of my friends use it to go to BART, at least pre-pandemic. And I have little kids, and we love the Daniel Tiger style trolley downtown, and we're very grateful for that project, and I hope that continues to thrive. So, thanks.
Great. Anyone else? All right. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the work you're doing with youth to try to engage them and get them comfortable with transit, at an early age. And thank you for this presentation tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right. We're jamming, guys. We're going to move on to item C, Newell Avenue bicycle and pedestrian corridor improvements. At this time, I invite staff to please provide the presentation.
Okay. Evening, commissioners. Might be a familiar face by now, but I'm Brianna Byrne, Associate Traffic Engineer here at the city. And tonight we are covering Newell Avenue and potential bicycle and pedestrian corridor improvements. So to give an overview of the topics we're going to discuss as part of this project, the study area, give you a little bit of the background and where we're coming from, and then go over some project components, the operational analysis as part of the project components, and then the next steps, and then the input that we seek from you. So the study area we are looking at this point is Newell Avenue, with the most west being the city limit, just west of South California Boulevard intersection, through South Main, Maria Lane intersection, and then to South Broadway where we have the Iron Horse Trail connection. And then also in this image, you can kind of see other destinations in the area where you have the downtown, Kaiser Hospital, Las Lomas High School to the south. And then we have Walnut Creek Intermediate shown there. And even though it's a little bit further up, it is the Iron Horse Trail acts as a connector to that school. And then here, we have these destinations. In addition to what was on that map, we have grocery, office, residential, a lot of uses downtown, as well as schools. And as part of that, we are also showing here the nearby low-stress bicycle facilities. The Iron Horse Trail on the east side, and then the Lafayette Moraga Trail and Olympic Boulevard Trail, which are to the west. And in the image on the right are our bike facilities, and you can see it's north-south, with a lot of east-west connections missing. So this is not a new issue. We've have several adopted plans that have identified this gap, with the first on this list being the Olympic Boulevard Corridor Trail Connector Study. That was in 2016, and to address the issue, it recommended a Class 1 along Newell Avenue. And Class 1 would be like the Iron Horse Trail. It's pedestrians and bikes mixing. And then the second one there is the Iron Horse Corridor Transportation Plan, adopted in 2020. And in that plan, it was a very broad general recommendation to improve the Newell Avenue South Broadway intersection. And then the last plan on there is the city's bicycle master plan, adopted August 2011, over 10 years ago now. And it had identified this gap connector and identified Class 3 facility, which is the Sharrows. And that is the cross section you can see there today, 5-lane road where the bicyclists mix with the vehicles. So in that Olympic Boulevard Corridor Trail Connector Study, like we talked about, the gap in high quality regional network, the Lafayette Moraga Trail and the Olympic Boulevard Trail to the west, high quality, low impact trail or low stress trails. And then the Iron Horse Trail to the east, and the network serves recreational and commuter trips. And as part of the preferred alignment in that study, as you can see, it includes Newell Avenue, where we have these Sharrows. And so the existing bike facility is not for all ages or ability levels. And as part of this, we have a couple, or within our study area, we have a couple capital investment program projects. The first one on the list is the Newell Avenue Bridge widening, which would be directly to make space for the Class 1. And then the second there is the Newell Avenue crosswalk within the study area, but the idea is to provide a mid-block crosswalk for Kaiser Hospital, as there's plenty of retail destinations to the north, and there's a shown need for this. So what we are coming to you today with, same goals, but we're looking at it with a fresh approach. So in an effort to identify a potentially lower cost and or feasible and complete alternative, we have explored whether there is the potential to reallocate roadway space from auto use to bicycle and pedestrian use. And we're coming at it like this: a high quality, low stress, two-way bicycle facility on the existing Newell Avenue cross section. So again, in that picture on the left, we have a viewpoint of this bridge that would need to be widened, and we have Class 3 facility. There's a terminology of level of traffic stress for bicycle facilities on a scale of 1 to 4. And this is approximately level 3, where it's suitable for about 10% of the population. And we're aiming for a level of stress 1 or level of stress 2, where level of stress 1 being very low stress, requires little attention, and then level 2 is low stress and suitable for about 60%. So beginning with the project components that we're looking into. So starting at the South California Newell Avenue intersection, modifications for the autos to make this project a possibility: remove one through lane in each direction on Newell Avenue, convert the southbound through left turn lane into a through only, and then we would be maintaining entry into Kaiser, as you can see in the lower right. With these, we would do some signal timing modifications. But with those improvements, pedestrian-wise, we would get that mid-block crosswalk, as you can see on the right. We could shorten the crossing distance for pedestrians at the intersection. The high-quality bike facility would have two ways, with bike crossing at the intersection. And then south, or to the west of this, we would have bike lanes to continue on through the neighborhood. Moving on to South Main, again, remove one lane in each direction, remove one of the westbound left turn lanes. As on the south side, we could add some on-street parking, passenger loading, a bus stop is shown there. And again, similarly, these measures can improve the crossing distance for pedestrians and again, get that two-way separated bike facility. Now, moving on to the Newell and Broadway intersection, in addition to removing one lane each direction on Newell, we explored the possibility of removing one southbound through lane and then the receiving lane on the other side of the intersection. We looked at removing one of the northbound through lanes, the northbound right slip, making a conventional square up the intersection, and then signal timing modifications. And for the pedestrian and bicycle improvements, again, we have the bicycle facility, but we looked at potentially a pedestrian scramble here, and that's what you can see kind of that cuts through the middle of the intersection there. And so as we move into the operational analysis, we included two scenarios, one with the ped scramble and one without. Okay. So, like I said, we have the existing conditions, which had existing lane configuration and signal timing, and this was our baseline. With the width lane changes, and so this was removing the through lanes, optimizing the signal timing to more appropriately serve the new lane configurations. And then the width scramble, we decided to do that separately. since once we add this scramble feature, we're directly adding delay to vehicles and giving it to a pedestrian-only phase. So looking at travel times, and so this is in the eastbound. So going from California towards Broadway, between the existing conditions and changes with lane configurations, it's 30-second increases in travel time across the whole section. Once we add in the ped scramble, 4 to 9 seconds, again, this is less than a minute of additional travel time for drivers. In the westbound direction, this is where we can see a 1 and 40-second increase between the existing and this ped scramble. And again, we're directly adding delay to the vehicles to give the extra pedestrian safety and bicycle safety for this crossing. But again, comparing the existing with the lane configuration, less than a minute's worth of delay increase. Looking at the intersection level service, so where before we were looking at a corridor wide, this is intersection to intersection. And here is the worst LOS between AM and PM. So most are LOSC, Maria Lane, LOSB currently. And then with the proposed lane configuration, the west half, D at California and Maine, and then the east half, we have LOSC. And then the jump to the scramble, California, Maine, and Maria don't change, but Broadway would go to LOSE for vehicles. So conclusions from the operational analysis. So while the auto level service degrades with the scramble crossing, the trade-off is providing an easier and safer crossing for the trail users. Travel time is expected to increase, but by tolerable levels. And then by reducing the size of the intersections and then helping the pedestrians cross more quickly, what we're doing is actually potentially decreasing the flashing don't walk period, and so we can have shorter cycle lengths, and so drivers can get the green quicker. And overall project findings, congestion would increase for the vehicles, but by minimal levels. There's a lot of ped activity there, and we have the potential to create a more walkable street. And then the bikes, again, there's unmet demand for a high-quality facility, and it's consistent with adopted plans. And reallocating roadway from auto use to bicycle and pedestrian use would potentially be a lower cost to construct and a more feasible and complete street project. So moving on to the next steps, we're reaching out to major employers, schools, and other groups. And then bringing us to today, we're seeking input for these improvements. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that presentation. At this point, are there any questions of our commissioners? Commissioner German?
Thank you. Great presentation. So I'm confused. Do you have the funding for these projects?
Did you ask if we have a fund? We have funding. A couple of them we do. We have some funding for preparing like conceptual plans for the Newell Avenue bridge, that bridge piece. And then we actually have funding to support the building of that mid-block crosswalk between Kaiser and the north. But then we also have other funding sources through, the capital budget that would help with this. But additionally, we'd be seeking grant funding specifically for this, for the major portion of it.
So about the mid-block passage, this is not the first time this has come up. Is Kaiser paying for that?
So the Kaiser crosswalk it serves multiple different people, and we have funding. The funding has already been allocated. It's available.
Have you surveyed the people going across those intersections? The mid-block one, do most of the people come from Kaiser?
Noted. I think we'll take that back and have some further discussions with Kaiser and see what's going on over there. It is currently a location where people are technically jaywalking, though. So I think it's a question of, if you build it, they will come, and, who else would be served by this location potentially. But like I said, we do have funding already allocated for this. I don't know where that funding came from. My hunch is TIF, but we can follow up with you.
Please do. Thank you.
Anyone else? Commissioner Reese, we'll go down the line.
So I read in the packet that there's going to be a phase one, which is more of a low-cost installation, and then potential for a higher cost installation for phase two. But I noticed a lot of brown on your drawings, and I'm curious, have you put any thought into maybe doing something a little more robust, or what are you going to do with all that brown space?
Yeah, so the brown was, to make it very clear, this is still concept level. But yeah, the goal is, get something out there sooner rather than later. And realistically, that means a phase one, easily implementable. And then, once we can acquire the funds, do something more permanent. The brown space is the space we have to play with, essentially.
Thank you.
Commissioner Salcido?
I forgot to note which intersection this happened at, but where it transitions from a 2-lane bike lane to separate sides of the street as it continues, I think, generally westward. How would that work for cyclists?
Yeah, so there are design guidelines for these types of transition points. Let me get there. But a common one is a bike box. So if we're looking here going in the westbound direction, you can kind of see that the west leg is more narrow than the east leg, and so there is kind of a little area to put a bike box and do a 2-stage left turn. The exact details would be figured out in the design process.
Okay. Vice Chair Ash?
Thanks. My first question is how does this impact the numbers? Do you have any information either for here that you're projecting or from other examples? Do you expect an increased use of bikers by 10% and pedestrians by 5%, and therefore there's less cars? I'm just kind of curious. And I know it might not be specific here, but conceptually, if we...
Yeah, I can't put a number to it, but what I can say is there is a vocal community. There is, even today, someone asked for improved facilities on Newell. And so there are those that are biking it now. And again, there's schools nearby, and if we build safer routes for the school children to get there, they'll be used.
Okay, and then just a follow-up, how can we help, as the commission, help you achieve these goals? This is a good project, so how can we assist or just, I don't know.
I think just getting strong feedback from you all would be really beneficial. You can probably give that to us during the comments. This is a very, very high-level concept plan. We're at the sketch level, just exploring this really. And so if there's, strong interest in this, we will talk to those other stakeholders too. Just encouraging staff basically to further explore this and go into the, design stage.
Great, and if there are no other questions, I'll ask mine. Are we good? Okay. There is no level of service type data for pedestrians and cyclists, is there? I mean, as I'm listening to this, I wish there was, but.
So there is. It's very data intensive and not necessarily reflective of what a pedestrian may say. This is LOSA, versus LSD. It's the methodology isn't quite there.
Okay. And so there's likely no real possibility for strong data collection as far as that's concerned in looking at this. I mean, yeah.
I mean, I think it's really tough with pedestrian, and actually specifically in this case, we're talking about a segment of a bicycle facility where, you know, you look at the map, you see that the gap is there. And yeah, we have sharrows on the street where you're sharing that area. It's higher speed. It's not comfortable to bike on. So the question is, what's the latent demand? And so again, I will use this terminology, but if you build it, they will come. And there is research on this, and we can definitely bring that to you and provide that information. But in terms of, you know, real data to say this is how many bikes we have out there, we could tell you, but it's a handful. And we're not just trying to serve that handful that's using it right now. We're trying to serve that latent demand. So we would expect that it would increase. But that is definitely more information that we could provide.
Yeah. Okay, great. If there are no other questions from our commissioners, I'm going to open it up for public comment. Are there any members of the public wishing to provide public comment?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah. Please, if you would like to provide public comment, fill out a speaker card. Is that necessary at this point? And approach the lectern. Yeah.
Hello. I live in Walnut Creek. I live near that, right behind the Iron Horse Trail, and I would like to first say that I would definitely be using the Newell Street if there was better bike lane, because I would not feel comfortable with the sharrows that are there now, but I would feel comfortable with a two-way bike lane. And then my second question was for you. Do you know if you would be using part of the sidewalk as well in this improvement, or would it just be an additional bike lane within the roadway? Sorry.
So what we have shown here is a class 4, so it's a bike lane. They wouldn't be mixing with the pedestrians. They would have their own dedicated area.
Cool, thanks. That's all.
Thank you for being here. Are there any members of the public on Zoom?
Yes, we have one member of the public.
Okay. If you're joining by Zoom, please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you are connected by audio only, if you would like to provide a comment. When brought in for comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. You will have 2 minutes to provide your public comment.
Okay, and I have member S. Chan,
Thank you.
so I'm bringing them on right now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Sue Chan. I live in Walnut Creek in the Parkmead neighborhood. And I would like to point out that our neighborhood is just west of the improvements. We are on Lilac and Newell. Both streets get a lot of, or they get a bit of pass-through traffic from the area. We have 4 schools that load and unload in our neighborhood on Lilac and Newell. That's Las Lomas, Tice Creek, Parkmead, and WCI, whose buses go along Lilac and Newell. We also get a lot of dog walkers from the neighborhood and pedestrians from Kaiser taking their strolls. And we also get a lot of bicycle groups coming through from Olympic and through Lilac and Newell. We do not have actual sidewalks. We have one side that's an asphalt. It's probably about 3 feet of asphalt adjacent to Lilac, and then Newell has one side that has gravel sidewalks. I noticed that the staff report doesn't make any mention of potential impacts to the streets, especially given that level of service is reducing with the improvements. I would like to request that the city look into the potential impacts of pass-through traffic that may not be using Newell, Main, and Broadway once the improvements happen, and potentially coming through the neighborhood. I believe those are all my points. Oh, one more. I would really like the city to engage the Park Need Community Association and residents on both streets before improvements are really solidified. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public?
I see no hands raised.
Great, thank you. Are there any comments from our commissioners? Commissioner Reese?
Thanks for the presentation. It's a very interesting project. And I really like the scramble idea. That's always been a difficult intersection to negotiate around the trail since it's a diagonal. So that's one of the highlights of the project. I also like the two-way cycle track on the north side. I think that typically we'd like to see one-way cycle tracks on each side, but I think in this case it makes sense. I would encourage you to look at ways to get the two-way cycle track on the east side across Broadway, and maybe think about if there's a way to make a connection to the park and ride lot for weekend people that maybe use the park and ride lot as a staging area for cycling. And then on the west side, the transition from the two-way cycle track to, it looks like going to be one-way bike lanes, class 2 bike lanes, striped, it looks like. I'd encourage you to look at making that connection strong so that so it's very easy for cyclists to make that transition. It would be great if you could take the two-way cycle track across that intersection as well, but I understand you have a couple of issues with the county line and you have difficulty getting underneath the freeway. But I would encourage you to think about how to make that connection smooth for riders, even if it's class 2 bike lanes, because we don't want to just truncate the project and all of a sudden leave them in the midst of a bunch of traffic. A couple things that I would suggest. It was mentioned earlier about level of service for pedestrians and bicyclists, and I think the way that I would think about it in your design development is through comfort. So look at what's comfortable for people to walk side by side, what's comfortable for two bicyclists to ride side by side, or for a cargo bike to be in the facility, and design around comfort as opposed to level of service. I think that that would be a way to really make this an excellent project. And I would also, I had mentioned the cargo bikes. Hopefully you can do some protected intersections along the corridor. And when you design those, if you could design them to be able to accommodate cargo bikes, that would be beneficial for families that are cycling, people that are using the facility for utilitarian trips, that sort of thing. Those are all my comments. And again, thank you for making an east-west connection. It's really, really needed.
Thank you. Any other comments? Commissioner Salcido?
Thank you for the presentation. I'm really excited about this project, and I'm excited about any time we can make progress on devoting more space to pedestrians and bicycles and prioritizing that mode of transportation over focusing so much on vehicular traffic. So I really appreciate the work that's been done. And I echo a lot of the comments that Commissioner Reese made in terms of the pedestrian scramble. As a pedestrian, I hate having to cross multiple streets just to get to the other side, and so love the diagonal. And share rows do not feel very safe to me as a bicyclist. About a year ago, I purchased an e-cargo bike, an e-assist cargo bike, in order to commute to school with my daughter who started kindergarten, and not have to deal with all of the lineup of cars at the elementary school. And I've been trying to use it as much as possible, but I'm not in that 10% of people who will bike everywhere. I'm probably more in that 60% in terms of my comfort level. So I'll do it more than a lot of people, but I've encountered a lot of difficulties trying to bike around Walnut Creek, particularly places like Ignacio Valley Road, where I have to use the sidewalk and it's not very wide and the traffic is scary and there are shrubs and trees in my face while I'm cycling on my bike trying to get through and pass by pedestrians. And so having bike lanes and dedicated places for bikes in the roadway is extremely helpful and definitely improves my comfort level as a cyclist. And so I can definitely see how more people would choose to make that connection and hopefully bike more often to get from point A to point B, not just for recreation, with this addition and the important connection that it makes. So I'm very supportive of all of the improvements that are proposed here.
Thank you. Vice Chair.
So thank you. I'll just echo the comments. I think the improvement to biking and to build it and they will come. Yes, I believe that, right? If you make it safer, if you make it more obvious, you will have more pedestrians and more bikers. And I think people want to do that, but they want to feel safe. So I like the whole plan. I'll just echo on the stakeholder outreach. One of the public comments was Parkmead Association, so please contact them and all the PTAs because it sounds like the schools will benefit a lot from this. So reaching out to the PTAs and sharing with them and maybe can coordinate an online Zoom. And then on the other side of the map and the highway there, is that still Walnut Creek City of, or is that now the unincorporated area on the map? That's unincorporated area. So since I'm learning a lot about that tonight, can we maybe have a conversation with the county parts and maybe they could put that on their radar screen, right? Because I hate for you guys to get like 80% of the road done and then, oh, here we go, it stopped, right? Because it does a lot to help the bikers and the pedestrians, but nobody who's biking and walking pays attention to the fact that it just became unincorporated county. And I know that's something the city struggles with, but at least it starts with a conversation with the county folks in that department.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you for your work on this. I think it's an exciting and important project for our city to look at. I went on a quick walk downtown. I live downtown, but walked through that area at commute hours just to try to get a picture of what it looks like, what space we have to work with, and there certainly is a lot of space to work with. Anytime we can make our streets safer for every type of traveling public, I think that's really important. It also feeds into the economic development of our downtown as we continue to grow with whether it's mixed-use type properties or what have you, just feeding into different types of populations that are going to utilize this. I do think if we build it, they'll come. And then I would, as projects like this roll forward, I think incorporating a piece of pedestrian and cyclist education into it is very important. So many times, and especially with schools nearby. I mean, how many times do we see people like this crossing streets? It drives me totally batty, and I think teenagers are guilty of it too. So just creating mindfulness with our pedestrian and cycling public is going to be important too as we move forward with some of these projects. And I think there are ways with signage and different education efforts that we can do that. Maybe even partnering with, you know, some of our local businesses who will enjoy the increased traveling public. And Kaiser's a health facility, for instance. They obviously care about people not getting hurt on our roads. So maybe there are some opportunities there as well. And that's it for me. Thank you guys very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think that's it for that item. Next, we're going to transition to item D. It's our traffic signal school part 2. At this time, please, staff, provide your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, commissioners, and hopefully I get a obligatory compliment from Commissioner Ash tonight.
Just really handed them out tonight, so.
Yeah, so part 2, here we are, and I bike and walk a lot of places. I actually don't try to drive at all, so I am talking about some car stuff tonight, but yeah, open all the comments, of course. So here we are, part 2. Let's see what this, here's kind of a roadmap of what we're doing. So part 1, if you remember, that was February at the special meeting. We covered basic equipment at the intersection, basic timing parameters, green, yellow, red, and we talked about the overall cycle length that a intersection will go through, as well as different phasing movements. Part 2 tonight, we're just going to cover detection and coordination and what that looks like. Part 3, we modified from since we set out on this journey, and I heard Commissioner Ash's request for 5 technologies, so we'll be presenting some of the intersection and street technologies that are out there that we know about and get some of your input on that. So that should be at one of the summer meetings. And then we'll get a badge for traffic signals. So here's an overview for tonight. We'll talk about the basic detection types, where they go at the intersection, as well as some priority vehicle detection that's out there. And then since we have detection, we can change a little bit of what the controller does and those operations. And then we'll conclude with coordination and what that entails. And we'll end with the time-space diagram, which is probably one of the biggest tools we have for coordination. So with detection at an intersection, there's lots of different types. The city of Walnut Creek uses 2 primary types, inductance loops and video detection. I am leaving off lots of other technologies out there, including radar, magnetometers, which are like little pucks that are embedded in the pavement that detect cars. And then there's LiDAR coming on the scene. So there's just lots of different, microwaves even, infrared is another. So looking at heat of different objects in the roadway. So, but in Walnut Creek, we mainly use inductance loop, which you can see on the left is cut into the ground. You can see them all over usually. And then we also have video detection. So those create virtual zones and provide a little bit more flexibility. So if we look at the pros and cons of induction loops, they are proven reliable. They're probably the oldest detection type we have. They're very simple. It's just a wire in the ground, coiled around 3 times, cut in the pavement. You can see our detail here on the bottom right. It has a slash in it with a Caltrans Type D loop to help detect bicyclists. Usually that's the first loop, and then the ones behind it would just be the regular circle. The cons of it is it does require lane closures, and construction crews often will hit these during construction, thus preventing. So when a loop gets cut, it automatically places a call whether a car is there or not. And then you can imagine snow impacts from grinding on the road. So we don't have to worry about that, but definitely one of the cons. In terms of data from these loops, we can get counts, we can get occupancies, which are basically how much a vehicle is over the loop for a duration of time. So it kind of gives you a sense of speeds or density or congestion. The cost for these loops is pretty low, just because it is simple equipment. You just got to do that lane closure. And then for video, some pros and cons. So pros are configurable zones. So you can see here on the right an image of a green box. Those boxes are drawn. That allows you to configure how long the zone is and where it is placed. And you can detect different types of vehicles. So whether it's a motorcycle, a bicycle, or a car, you don't really have problems detecting those. Where with loops, sometimes motorcycles or bikes may not be detected if the sensitivity isn't high enough. The cons of video, you get sun and fog conditions that might obstruct the view. Usually they're pointed down and they have a visor to prevent the sun coming in and hitting the lens. And then you also have to make sure that the mast arm has an appropriate spot to mount the camera, and then they may require some maintenance in terms of configuration or cleaning the lens. So from the data perspective, we do get a nice video feed that we can view live, so we could see some current conditions. And then it allows for additional data to be downloaded, such as classifications, number of cars, and that kind of thing. The cost will go up. You need about 4 cameras at each intersection, usually, 1 for each approach. There are other vendors that sell 1 camera for a whole intersection. There's other pros and cons with those, but typically in Walnut Creek, we have, when we do video, we'll have 4 cameras at an intersection, and so the cost goes up significantly. Just a quick plug here. So if you do think a detector has been broken at an intersection, let us know. We have traffic signal techs. We can do something about it. So dutytraffic@walnutcreek.org is probably one of the best ways. We do want some information. We would want to know which intersection, which direction you were going, as well as which lane you were in, because sometimes the lane can vary. And then we also want to know specifically what day, what hour, and what minute. And that's because we can run reports down to the minute and kind of understand what was being served and not. And then some things we can do is we can reset the loops, kind of give them a refresh. Sometimes they get a little confused if there's too much, essentially, noise or static on the line. And then we can also clean lenses for cameras to help improve detection there or redraw zones. So looking at where we put these detection, so it could be video or it could be induction loops here in the city. But typically, so for this intersection, this is at Main and Mount Diablo, just downtown here. We have detection at the stop bar. And so if we zoom in, that would be just in front of the crosswalk, essentially. And this places a call for that movement. So a car comes over those loops, it triggers that call, and that phase will be served. So these zones might be only 1 loop, or it might be a bunch of loops, and 10 to 50 feet would be typical. Depending on the speed or the number of vehicles going through there, or if it's a left turn lane or a through lane, that would determine how long that zone would be. So there they are. You can actually see them in the pavement from the satellite view. The second of the 3 places we put loops or we put detection is the advanced loops. So these are set back maybe 150 feet to a few hundred feet back from the stop bar. So these will place advanced calls into the controller, and they'll let it know that a car is on its way. And what's nice about those is they can actually extend the green longer, so you can prevent someone having to run the yellow because the green has been extended. This is what's known as kind of the dilemma zone. What's also nice about these, if you don't have stop bar, you can have these advanced loops place what's called a lock call, which essentially places a call for that phase, and you can go with less loops at the intersection. So some of our intersections will just have these advanced loops. So there they are. The third and final place that we put loops are system detector loops. So these go after the intersection, so downstream of the intersection after you've already cleared it. And what that does is it leaves a nice place for where cars are going over them freely, usually at normal speeds. And it gives us nice, rich vehicle counts and occupancy and speed estimates. So these aren't at all our intersections, but it is a standard in the city. And you'll see those throughout the city as well. So there those are. Some other technology at the intersection are these priority vehicle detections. So we have emergency vehicle detections where actively responding fire and ambulance vehicles can request a green for their movement, getting them through the intersection and improving their travel time overall. This is an infrared emitter on the vehicle as well as on the mast arm, which you can see in the top right there with these little birdies, they call them sometimes, to get the signal from the vehicles. Another technology is transit signal priority, and this will place a lower priority call to try to encourage the controller to give a green for that phase. And buses that are equipped with this technology would get a green sooner to help keep them on schedule. Right now, we have a project that will be putting TSP on routes 4 and 5 through the downtown. So that includes, intersection upgrades and equipment on the bus with CCTA as well as cross-county connection to make those improvements. Plug for the bicycle detection as well. So bikes are easily detected on video with the video detection, and they can be notified that they've been detected with additional signage and technology. Okay, so now that we have an overview of our inputs from the field with this detection, we can run the controller in a new way that allows it to what we call place it in free mode. So basically responding to different vehicles approaching the intersection. So we call that placing a call, and essentially each vehicle or bike or object will come and place a call into the controller requesting a green for that phase. And then you can also extend the green with those advanced loops for additional green time. And then when there's no more vehicles on a certain phase, we call that gapping out. So it'll essentially terminate before the maximum hits. And then as we talked in part 1, we have a maximum time that if vehicles are in demand, if there's a lot of vehicles, then it would place a call and continually until the time maxes out, in which case we would terminate the green and serve the opposing phase. Okay. So moving on to traffic signal coordination. Essentially, what this does is since you're going to give a green phase to each approach, you might as well have them align. And so this helps align them along a specific corridor. It's not for every corridor, but it can be very effective when you have big corridors that need that service a lot of vehicles. So the pros are overall reduces emissions, improves travel times, and improves safety because you have left harsh braking and accelerating because people just travel through it, hopefully the speed limit. Overall, the cost to benefit ratios on traffic signal coordination are pretty high because it does take some money to do, but overall the improvements are so big and can be realized with so many cars. The cons are side street delays. So you are overall possibly setting a higher cycle length for the intersection to go through, and so that can cause some additional side street delays. And at larger intersections, left turns and the minor streets can be impacted as well. So there are some requirements for coordination. That includes you have to get all the controllers at each intersection on a common clock. So typically, this could be a hardware added to the cabinet, or it could be communicating to a central location, like here at City Hall for the time. But once they're all on the same clock, then you can start to align their phases. So first with the common clock, then we can build out their splits. So the splits include the green, yellow, and the all red phase for each phase. So those are set. It doesn't mean they have to use the whole phase, but those would be predetermined. And then we have to have to set a cycle length. So that determines an amount of time that each intersection will go through, and they all have to agree. That way they can all essentially cycle together. And then the last requirement is having an offset time between intersections. So essentially it's spaced. We'll come back to all these. You'll see them on the time-space diagram. I do want to mention the asterisk here. All these, getting all these inputs and these values is not free. Requires extensive data collection, modeling, and implementation, which is always the hard part. So for coordination, typically you would look at a chart like this, which is average daily traffic, showing the number of vehicles over a time of day. And so at some point in the day, maybe in the morning, maybe here around 6:30 or 7, you would draw a line and say, hey, let's run a certain plan starting there and capture all the traffic until maybe it dies down, and then change to another plan with a different cycle length through the midday, and then maybe the PM would have a different one. So it just helps you assign different phases for the different times of day. And then on the weekend, maybe you would have one midday plan, or possibly two if you break it up, depending on what the traffic looks like. Okay, final concept here, and then we'll wrap it up. So this is just a walkthrough of the time-space diagram. Probably the biggest tool we use for making sure our signals are coordinated. So you can imagine a car here. This could easily be a bicycle as well. If you change the speeds, they could also be timed. So the car just travels down through a fixed distance. It's just essentially driving down a street. But really, that's not too accurate. We would need to add a time as well to go through the time dimension that we all experience all the time. So here, driving through, traveling through equally, moving down in the diagonal. Now, if we go through distance faster than time, we would go faster. And if we went through more time than distance, it would be slower. So you can see a horizontal line across here would be stopped. And if you went straight down through time, it'd be like teleportation. So now let's throw in a traffic signal. So here I threw in Ignacio Civic. Let's say it has a green phase. The left there is the starting of the green phase, and it goes through all the green, the yellow, and then it turns red on you, and the other phases are served. So we're only looking at a specific direction on Ignacio and Civic, let's say east-west, and then it goes back to green, yellow, red. So it's just going through time, the intersections in a certain specific distance, and our car is going to go drive down, and unfortunately, he's not going to go through the yellow, and he's going to stop on the red. So here, the car is stopped. It's just going through time. And then once the signal turns green, he'll continue on. So that's what one intersection does. So there's his path. You can kind of see the delay there caused by the red light. And now let's take a look at a couple signals together. So here we have Ignacio Civic, Ignacio and Walnut Boulevard, and Ignacio and Homestead. So these are all sequential down here in Walnut Creek. And let's go ahead and drive the car. And again, he hits that red light. And now because these signals have been coordinated, he can just, the vehicle can drive right through them. And so then going back to full circle on the requirements, we can see here that we have split, which would be the green, the yellow, and then the 1 or 2 seconds of all red. So it's just a few seconds of all red, and then it goes to another phase. We can also see a cycle length, that's start of green to start of green. And then we can see the offset. So you can say at Ignacio Civic, we started at the start of green. Notice at Ignacio Walnut Boulevard, that start of green shifted over a little bit. And then at Homestead, it shifted over a little bit more. And that's just because the distance between those intersections, you want them to turn on, you all want them to turn green a little bit delayed from each other. And so that's essentially your offset value. So that's all. I'll open it now to feedback, comments, questions, and compliments.
Thank you so much for that. Are there any questions out of the commissioners? Yes.
On the slide on treat, I just have a clarification question. Can you flip back to a couple? There you go. So the bottom is the time of the day. To the left, that's volume. Is it by thousands? Is it just 850 cars at peak at that moment? How am I reading this?
Yeah, so I think these would be grouped into maybe 15-minute bins. Yeah, 15-minute intervals on the bottom there. So yeah, 800 cars for 15 minutes.
Okay, got it.
This is real data. This was taken, I think, back in September. So this data is taken with a tube count. So they lay a tube across the road and they count the number of cars that are running over that air tube. And then the tube sensor presses the air and counts the cars. So it's like a mid-block. So it says treat between Bancroft and Candelario. So somewhere between Bancroft and Candelario, they stretch these tubes out and they counted the number of cars.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, I don't have any questions, so at this point, we'll open it up for public comment. Do we have any members of the public wishing to comment?
We have no members of the public wishing to provide comment. Oh, sorry, we do. We do have somebody.
Oh, excellent.
Fine.
Okay, if you're joining us by Zoom, which it must be.
Yes.
Please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if you are connected by audio only. If you would like to provide a public comment, when brought in for public comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. You will have 2 minutes to provide your public comment.
Okay. Robert, I'm bringing you in.
Yes, hi, good evening. Thank you for the presentation. I just had a chuckle because I heard the gentleman talk about drivers driving the speed limit in Walnut Creek. Oh, by the way, I do live in Walnut Creek on Bradley Avenue, which is just south of Ignacio Valley Road off Walnut Boulevard. Anyway, I just had a chuckle on the driving the speed limit. I'm the only one that I know that drives the speed limit. That's all. But I hope to bring up an issue for Walnut Boulevard. I'm not sure this is the right forum, but we desperately
Pardon me,
need.
that actually would have been during public comment in the beginning of the meeting if it was an item that wasn't agendized. So perhaps you can visit us again or email staff, refer it to
It's
staff.
kind of urgent, a crosswalk and a speed bump along Walnut Boulevard.
If you can refer it to staff, we would really appreciate that.
How do I do that? Do I come into the city hall?
Smadar.
Yeah, you can.
I've called the traffic department 4 or 5 times.
Yeah,
No, I never get a response.
I think we have your information, so we'll be in contact with you.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. There's kids walking to WCI twice a day. It's crazy. And I see
Okay.
people going 30, 40
Thank you
miles
very
an
much.
hour.
Thank you very much for
It's
joining us. And
dangerous.
staff looks forward to hearing from you. Okay. Are there any comments from our commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Reese.
So I'll compliment your presentation first because I thought the little coordination diagram was awesome.
Thanks.
Sorry. I've
Definitely going to give him that one. Now I've come up with another one.
You have some time to think about it. I was wondering how you were going to talk about time-space diagrams, and that was just, I've never seen it done that way before, and it was just really, really good. So I just wanted to give you credit for that. But I do have one comment that I think is important. We go down and we talk about traffic signals and we talk about how they work for cars, and we spend a lot of time and effort on detection and how to move the cars through. But what we don't do is think about the pedestrians and think about how pedestrian detection needs to work, how it needs to accommodate people that walk slower, how it needs to accommodate people with disabilities, being able to reach the detection and being able to cross safely. And so I would encourage you in your presentation next time to add something about pedestrian detection and how it can work, such as pedestrian recalls in downtown so people don't have to push the button. When you're in a downtown environment, sometimes there'll be a couple of people waiting at the intersection. Somebody will come up and they'll think the button was pushed, but it wasn't. And it's a way of providing a safer environment so that pedestrian then, when the light does change, doesn't think they can cross, only to realize that the people before them didn't push the button. So I think it'd be great if you could add that to your presentation to provide that input for people who walk. So thank you, and again, the diagram was awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll definitely throw that in, consider those technologies.
Commissioner Salcido?
I would just ditto Commissioner Reese. I would love to understand how we can do more to first understand what we're doing today and how we can potentially improve detection of pedestrians and bicyclists to make our streets more convenient and walkable, bikeable, and easier to use these other modes of transit, because I know as a pedestrian myself, I'm always like barely reaching the button to cross the street before the light changes, and then I have to wait an entire signal sequence in order to finally get across, or same on my bike, always like barely approaching the intersection, just not in time to make it across. So would love to hear more about that.
Thank you.
Vice Chair?
So my compliment will be just on the overall work, right? Like, one, this is great education for us, so I'm really glad you've taken the time to put all this together. I'm learning a lot. But also just on the work for coordinating the traffic, right? Like, to make sure it flows through the city is, I'm clearly learning a big effort, and so I just appreciate staff and how hard you're working to do that. And I'm all in favor of the multi-modes and the pedestrian preferences, but I would also just, on the through streets, Ignacio Treat, where you're moving large amounts of traffic, right? I would say the priority does have to be for the traffic moving versus the pedestrians. But overall, particularly in residential areas and shopping areas in the downtown, I'm definitely in favor of what everybody was talking about for showing the data on that. But just in terms of the sync, I would say through streets have to be, moving those cars quickly.
And I have no comments except for just thank you very much for this educational presentation. And I hope this type of information might be available for residents who are interested online and that kind of a thing as well. So if there are no other comments from our commissioners, then we'll move on to item number 5. And thank you so very much for being with us tonight. And item number 5 is commissioners' announcements and brief reports on activities. I would like to invite commissioners and staff to provide their reports in this regard. Vice Chair Ash?
I have one from CCTA. So recently at CCTA, the Contra Costa Transit Authority Advisory Committee, we had a presentation from East Bay Parks, which controls the Canal Trail, the Iron Horse Trail, and a couple of the other trails. And I was asking some questions, particularly around lighting on the Canal Trail, which runs from Lime Ridge all the way through to the Pleasant Hill BART, right? Which a lot of people I know take anywhere from the hospital down Ignacio. And we're talking about how to get lighting on there. And I've been in these meetings before where I've heard people say, well, East Bay Parks just refuses to do that. So it came up, and they were actually willing to do it. They said one of the bigger problems is the right-of-ways where you'd bring electricity most likely is owned by the city. And so it had to be a coordination. And so CCTA reached out afterwards, and they said that appropriately should bring it up here, and maybe we should talk about it, but maybe there could be like a joint working group, and they believe they will have funding in the next year or two because of the transportation package from the federal government that they might be able to run a couple of pilots. And they would love the idea of, hey, let's get this done in Walnut Creek, and then maybe they could identify 2 or 3 other pilot programs where they could do lights to it has to be to public transit facilities, right? That's the benefit where the money is. So taking bikes to Pleasant Hill BART was one. So it came up with parks and with CCTA, and I'd love to see if we could facilitate a meeting, but that would be my update from a couple conversations there.
Okay, thank you. Any other updates from commissioners? Commissioner Salcido?
Just quickly, I was fortunate to attend the Redefining Mobility Summit that was hosted by CCTA, and there was a lot of really exciting innovation in terms of autonomous transit and different transit options that were presented, as well as updates on LiDAR detection services and things like that. And one of the vendors who was at the summit did offer tours potentially to transportation commissioners of the Momentum station in Concord, where they're testing a lot of these new innovations. And I don't know if that is something that we would be interested in or be able to pursue at some point, but I think it was really eye-opening to see some of the possibilities that exist in the future and things that we should start thinking about and planning for.
Great, thank you for that. Are there any other reports from commissioners? Okay, how about any reports from staff?
I have a report, yes.
Great.
I think we skipped this last time, so I might have, well, it might be old news, so I'll skip that. But we did do, part of our Neighborhood Streets program is, engaging with the community in a few different neighborhoods. And we recently did some pop-up demonstrations. That's where we use very, very short-term materials like straw wattle, cones, pinwheels, flower pots, that kind of thing, just for a couple hours on the street. And so we deployed that in the Homestead neighborhood. We had a traffic circle at Greenway and Walnut Boulevard and a narrowing at Homestead and Matt, what was the other? It's okay. Anyway, so that was led by Matt Redmond, Mariposa, thank you. And then, so that was a couple weeks ago. I did want to let you all know that we do have an upcoming project. It is part of our, capital. It is a capital project that is going to be going out to bid for construction soon for Lennon Lane, which will be a one-way bikeway. So it's a protected bike lane on Lennon, but just in a single direction for both directions. And that is going to be part of a larger paving job. So it's really just the implementation of the Shadelands multimodal plan, what's envisioned there. And so that's expected to be under construction during the summer. In advance of that, we'll be doing a pop-up demonstration of a protected bike lane on North Wiggett on Saturday. And staff will be out there from about 9 till 1. And the intent is to capture some of the folks who are coming out from the Canal Trail connector path that connects to North Wiggett who are headed to the farmers market. So we're just trying to naturally capture some folks, see what they think. And we spent the past couple days painting and making our own materials to try stuff out. So we really look forward to, hopefully, if you can all attend, at least for a little bit, try it out, bring your bike. That would be great. And we will be surveying some folks too. And then tomorrow is Bike to Work Day. And so I highly encourage everyone here and everyone who might be watching this to bike to work tomorrow. We will be hosting an Energizer station outside of City Hall on North Main near Civic. And we will have some really good giveaways that we got. We received some donations from some local businesses. So I'm really trying to hype it up a lot, but it's some pretty good hype that's well deserved. And so I think that's about it. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for those updates. Bearing no other updates, I hereby adjourn the May 19th, 2022 regular meeting of the Transportation Commission. Our next meeting is scheduled for July 21st, 2022.